Good afternoon. Welcome to this presentation entitled Current Issues in Design Policies, Balancing Tensions. My name is Rui Monteiro, one of the co-authors of this paper, and please note that this is a pre-recorded audio, so any questions are more than welcome by the email that you can find at the end of this presentation. So the objective here is to investigate a debate on design public policies by proposing a novel triangulation on fundamental issues which remain unsolved and therefore highlighting tensions and how they relate to each other. This objective lies on one hand how design has been presenting itself as an asset for offering new possibilities on how to envision the world and the future, but simultaneously how policymakers have been embracing design, and actually for the past 25 years there has been an emergence of dedicated public policies for design. But while there is evidence on how design can contribute to innovation, when it comes to design policies there are so many factors in between that makes it difficult for deciphering them and understand how they interconnect. Therefore, what we propose here is an approach that highlights possible gaps and links based on the state-of-the-art of the current discussion in design policies, which has led to a triangulation which separates innovation policies, research, development, innovation, and multiplicity of definitions for design to each other and to design policies, and are most often mixed and entangled together within the discussion of design policies. Therefore, what we intend to do here is to separate which separates innovation policies, research, development, innovation, and multiplicity of definitions for design. All of these interrelate to each other and to design policies and are most often mixed and entangled together within the discussion of design policies. Therefore, what we intend to do here is to separate each one of these as to understand the tensions within them and then the tensions among them. So, for first context, when it comes to innovation policies, what we witness is a discussion that draws parallels between design and innovation policies. When it comes to research, development, and innovation, there have been proposals of design methods and how these should stand in relation to these processes. And when it comes to definitions, there's also many proposals for setting a scope of what design means, stands for, and can do. So all of these interrelate quite well, and for the upcoming slides we are trying to go deeper into each one of these issues and to understand what is being discussed in terms of the academic research here and what within that discussion are existing contradictions. So starting with the first issue on innovation policies, the first point is actually that there are contrasting perspectives between design policies and innovation policies, as they actually sit in different bodies of knowledge and schools of thought. But this has led to efforts in establishing parallels of bringing these two perspectives closer, namely the building up of the design and innovation ecosystem, which is based entirely on the innovation ecosystem model. And actually, it is also interesting to note that innovation studies by themselves actually most often neglect design, but design studies actually take innovation for granted and as a consequence of design. Another perspective which should be taken into account is that design policies are based on the same theoretical foundation of innovation policies, which is a systems failure theory. And for the second issue, research, development, and innovation, one can start by noting that design has also been looking at its own methods, and this needs to understand where design stands within these processes. For this, one can look, for example, in the two cornerstone references, namely the Frascati manual that focus on research and development, and also on the Oslo manual that focus on innovation. Both of these references, it should be said, are extensively used to develop policies in terms of R&D and in terms of innovation. So, in the particular case for design and the Frascati manual, it states that design and R&D activities are difficult to separate. So it raises a question of where one ends and one starts. Contrary, the Oslo manual already states that design does not meet all of the 5 R&D criteria that actually the Frascati manual establishes, but that design are essentially innovation activities. So, but this difficulty in finding a place for design within the research, development, and innovation processes is also reflected in design policies. And just picking a case for the European Union design policy action, it states that design is complementary to R&D. So one can sense the contradiction of the broader picture of where to place design in these processes. Now, when it comes to the multiplicity of design definitions, there has been, as previously mentioned, an array of definitions that have been emerging from more broader to more narrow definitions. In the context of this paper, we can differentiate those put forward by the design field and those put forward by the design policies, just to make it easier to understand the context where we are. Starting with the first, one can notice that the discourse goes on one hand that design is many times captured by the innovation and production discourses, which is precisely what design policies use, and of course this discourse of highlighting and incorporating design in innovation production discourse is also put forward many times. On the other hand, the definition is also dynamic. It changes along the time, as in the 80s period with the emphasis on styling, 90s on brand and marketing, and recently on strategy, just to simplify the overall change in definition. Another perspective that is also important to note when it comes to definitions is an effort by the design field to prove the value of design to non-designers by showing that it is mostly and more than aesthetics and meaning of products. It therefore aligning with the strategy narrative. When it comes to policies, there are many examples, and design policies, what most if not all do, is presenting a definition for design. Here there are two examples. For example, in Queensland in Australia, it said that good design is sustainable design. It's a process joining creativity and innovation. And in Iceland, the idea here is not so different from Australia, as design is a collective term for various fields, and it therefore links designs with creativity and innovation. So very close definitions. So what these issues show us is that there are contradictions among each of these issues, and they reflect, in this perspective of the paper, essentially tensions due to boundary problems. And these tensions are an interesting ground for putting up new questions that can hopefully lead to new research and answer on the topic. So, going through some of these suggestions for questions on how to transform these tensions into further research. For example, should design policies give way to innovation policies, as it's not clear where design policies should stand? On one hand, we have a narrative saying it should be developed as a standalone strategy, but on the other hand, and paradoxically, it also says that it should move towards integration with innovation policies. And this perspective, it's also interesting to note how the same systems failure theory is used both to innovation policies and design policies, which further subscribes this question. So, by establishing two opposite endpoints, full integration or standalone strategy, is just an easy way to have a better picture on the options in between that can therefore lead to clearer roadmaps on how to use designing without purpose. In this sense, it is important to further study theoretical options for design policies and contrast and connect with the innovation policies rationale and establish different scenarios for design policies. Another question that came up is, are design methods not researchally enough? And this comes essentially based on the reluctance in embodying design within standard R&D models and approaches, on the premise that design is essentially presented as complementary to R&D. But simultaneously, we also witness ongoing efforts in defining and design own methods. So this kind of raises the question that it seems that design is placed in a sort of middle ground in policy making. It's not quite research and development, but design methods seem useful in a way. But these contradictions go further, and we can find contrasting perspectives between design R&D and design practices, as the reference manuals and even academic discourse do not find agreement on how to differentiate these two. So there is a need to further study design in the context of R&D and AI processes, and in the context of its practice, professional, economic, and social, by establishing boundaries where they are to be defined and connections where they are required. And finally, this also led to a question of, does design needs a broader definition that can perhaps hinder its strength, as by broadening the field, there has been, of course, new contexts and new connections, which strengthens and solidifies design by putting it continuously to tests and to develop new approaches. But simultaneously, it also stretches the search for design definitions, leading to a sort of elastic rubber problem. The more you stretch to reach other fields, the thinner some part of the rubber will be. Of course, this is true if the rubber is not solid enough, meaning there needs to be more solid work on definitions for design. So, as a consequence, meanings, definitions, and concepts for design is not just a theoretical exercise, but it has very practical consequences, particularly in the context of design policies, where policymakers find themselves in trouble understanding what design is. And actually this connects quite well with the presence of definitions for design in policies, as it shows a recurring need to define it and establish a definition that fits the context and the strategy taken. So it just shows how it matters to understand and put forward a definition. So consequently, by putting forward or disseminating a definition that englobes most, if not all, sectors, it might undermine and undervalue how design understood, thus being important to clarify boundaries and do further work on possible definitions and scopes and boundaries of these. So thank you so much for your attention. If you have any questions or any other comments, please write us through the email that you can see here. Thank you.